do this workshop for Eastern Edge and for some of the crew back home. And I mean, I don't know where everyone is located right now, but like I was saying earlier, it's nice for me to still, feel connected and thought of and things like that back home. So it's always good. This will be, specifically written about grant writing, but I think a lot of this information is definitely applicable to exhibition proposals, to residency proposals, to any sort of application process you'll come across as an artist. And there might even be specific times where I reference like exhibitions and things like that. And if you have questions about that, please don't be afraid to ask. I have a couple slides near the end where I talk specifically about applying to an artist-run center or applying to grad school and more specifics about that. But I'll kind of read the room and see if the interest is there for people to have those discussions as well. This is going to be hopefully a dialogue, a back and forth. I do have slides, I do have notes, but I don't just want it to be a lecture for me sitting here for 45 minutes to an hour. I definitely encourage you to turn on your mic, to ask questions, to even say comments, things like that. And if I end up missing something in the chat, I'm sure like Ashley or someone can just like chime in, cool, perfect, and let me know. The other thing is, don't worry too much about trying to take down notes and scramble things down on paper. You're going to get a copy of all these slides, and I'll also send you a copy of all of my speakers' notes as well. So you'll always have this as a reference that you can come back to and as a resource moving forward. So a little bit about me. Did the slides change? Just confirming that things are working. Okay, perfect. Just so you don't think I'm a random person, talking about grants and things, I like to kind of talk about where I came with my grant writing journey, I guess, and how it's changed, and kind of hit a couple different marks. So like many people back home in Newfoundland, I started with an Arts NL grant. Back in 2016 was my first one, which is, it'll be 7 years now that I think about it, which is kind of insane to think about. But I've written many individual grants, so Arts NL, City of St. John's, Canada Council for the Arts, and I've served on the jury for the Canada Council as well. But I've also got some experience working with organizational grants or larger funding bodies through working at Eastern Edge, which I did for the past 5 years before moving to Montreal. So I've written like capital fund grants, sustained funding, cultural economic development plans, various things like that. So I've tried to take different things I've learned from each of those grant applications and put it into this process as much as I possibly can. We're going to start with something very basic, and that is, what is an artist grant? Because I feel like a lot of the time, people, maybe you're emerging artists, maybe you're just getting back into things, maybe you've been a commercial artist your whole life and just relied on sales and you're not sure what a grant actually is. This is where we're going to try to suss that out. So to me, grants are one of the many ways that artists can fund their practice. And the fact of the matter is that, of course, a lot of artists work various jobs. People call them day jobs. They're just jobs, whether it's in the arts, whether it's not in the arts, to pay your rent, to pay your bills, and to be able to afford to live. But artist grants are a really incredible way to find that funding so that you can focus in on a project and to secure that funding specifically to make your artwork. A lot of the time, when you're not applying for grants, you're just trying to pay for your everyday costs and then scrounge up a little bit to buy new materials or to buy yourself some time to work on something. But artist grants almost, to me at least, give you permission to work on the project that you're passionate about. Larger grants can actually also provide funds that cover a lot of living costs, whether that's like a year-long project or a multi-year project, and they cover artist fees for yourself so that you're actually getting paid to make the work, and you're not just getting funds to cover materials. I think it's really, really important that you have money in that grant to sustain yourself and to sustain your life and your livelihood, because without that, you can't be making art. I also talk a little bit about, I guess, the types of artists that you might have heard of. And there's different categories. A lot of people, you like to use phrases such as like a commercial artist, an exhibiting artist, a contemporary or a conceptual artist. And I think these can be very useful when you're talking about your own work. But I also think that those lines are so blurred when it comes to the business of being an artist. I think that's definitely common for people to have a more commercial practice, to be represented by a gallery, to sell their work, but then to also have the availability to apply for grants for bigger projects or to apply for funding to help, keep the momentum going for them. So if you ever end up having a question as to whether or not your work fits under a grant proposal or under a project idea, I definitely encourage you to actually reach out to the funder, get them familiar with who you are, with the, how you've been making your income in the past, and say, hey, is this appropriate for me, or does this make sense for me? And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how the artist can build a relationship with the funder throughout your application process as well. And that's why it's actually really cool that Katrina is here, because I do make some references to Arts NL, which is the example that's on our minds right now. I know the deadline is coming up in a few weeks, so I tried to tailor this conversation kind of around that deadline. So like I said, grants exist on many, many different levels. Arts NL is the one that's kind of on all of our minds right now. The City of St. John's had their grant deadline, I believe. Is that in end of November still? December, something like that. So that's, it's passed, still happens every single year, so far as I know. But they exist municipally, provincially, nationally. Almost every province has their own big kind of funding body. All large cities do. And then, of course, there's the Canada Council for the Arts. I know it's kind of intimidating as well to think like, oh my God, there's at least 3 different things I need to apply to every year. But there's definitely some tricks you can do to make life easier for yourself. Chances are they're all going to ask for some sort of CV or bio or artist statement. So these are the types of documents that are evergreen to you. If you keep them updated, if you check in on them occasionally, then they'll always be available to you to just pull from and use for your grant applications. So never look at a grant deadline and think you have to start from scratch, or that you have to, abandon everything you've ever worked on. No, there's definitely ways to utilize the resources you've already created. Is everyone following so far? Am I talking too fast? Is everything clear? Everything's good? Okay. Also, if you hear me sniffing or drinking water, I'm just coming down from a cold. So hopefully it's not too distracting. Okay, so the first, I guess, section of the meat and bones is going to be on preparation, and it's going to be on the research. So how do you come up with a project idea? How do you start getting your ideas, put on paper, and how do you get the ball rolling? This is where everything kind of starts. And I think a lot of the time, and I know I can speak for myself and for many other people when I say this, but coming up with a project idea can be very stressful. It can be very intimidating to feel like you are locking yourself into a project that might change, but just remember that is totally okay. Most funders and selection committees definitely understand that projects change and that projects evolve, especially as someone's art practice grows and you grow as a person, you grow as an artist. So if things change throughout your proposal and you need to adapt that original proposal, it's usually perfectly fine, as long as you still stay true to, I guess, the overall themes or the intentions of what you proposed. There shouldn't be any issues. That being said, if you're worried about it, there is no harm at all in approaching the organization, your funder, and then just asking, saying, hey, do you have 15 minutes where we can sit and discuss my progress on my project so far and how I think things are going to be changing? Typically, it's part of their responsibilities or their job to troubleshoot and answer those types of questions. So don't feel afraid to send an email, pick up the phone, give people a phone call, because it's better safe than sorry. You don't want to overcommit yourself to something that might not be eligible or that you have to pedal back on. Okay, these next 3 slides are going to be very scary, potentially, just because it's a lot of words. It's a lot of like, what does this mean? What is eligibility? These were pulled from Arts NL, but like I said, they were from, oh my God, a few years ago now. And I think everything is a little bit different in the portal, at least.
I'll help here.
Yeah, exactly. Katrina can change things here.
So this came from the 1980 when Arts NL was created. It sounds very legalese.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read it and you register, because you have to apply online, you can't do paper copies. This is the first thing that you'll be faced, is if you're a professional artist. Since this is Eastern Edge, I'm assuming most of you are visual artists. So what we're looking for mainly is an exhibition history of some kind. So if you are in a more rural environment, you might have a place that acts as a gallery, say a coffee shop. If you are more craft-based, maybe you've shown at craft fairs. So, or maybe powwows or something along those lines. So you don't have to be a trained artist. It can be self-taught. It can be, so these words are basically that you're not creating work in your studio and not showing it anywhere. And, that it's basically held on too close to your chest. And the first thing, it's always a huge mistake. First thing you're going to do is try to get money to get support it. So you might have commissions and things like that. And usually a phone call, and I will be able to say, okay, no, okay, no, you do drone work for a company. No. Oh, wait, a school bought an entire exhibit of yours? Wait, and it's on exhibit? Okay, there we go. There we go. That's the one we want. And so these words sound very legal. It's because they were developed, but really what we're looking for is that exhibition kind of experience. And that's how you can lay out your CV the first time it's going through, exhibition history, training workshops, that kind of thing.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you, Katrina. I think people do get intimidated when they see lists like this. And it's not just Arts NL, it's the Canada Council as well. They've all got these kind of intimidating lists to begin with, but it's about contacting the organization, figuring out how you fit into that criteria. Because even though it's daunting, it's also totally step-by-step. These are here for a reason. They're here to make sure that you have enough details to write a successful grant and that you're actually eligible for the grant. Like I said, you don't want to be putting a lot of work into something that you're maybe not yet eligible for, or maybe you're highlighting the wrong part of your career. So yeah, I think it's really important. And another thing to note is that a lot of these things are changing, maybe a little bit slower changing in funding bodies and things like that. But when it comes to artist run centers or galleries, I think the definition of an artist has become more and more broad and more accessible over the years. So you're going to be finding a lot of this language kind of changing over time. And it's going to be saying, like, I guess an example I could say is for Eastern Edge and for a couple of other artist run centers, we used to say, submit your CV, submit your project proposal, submit X, Y, and Z. But now another option is you can record yourself in a video, just explaining who you are, what your career as an artist has looked like, what you're proposing to us. So it's, yeah, having those different methods of people having access points to the funding and to the organization is really, really important. Again, there's more information like this. I'm not going to go through all of this because it's, it changes and it's different for every person. But one thing I will say, and that's usually quite important, unless it's changed, I don't think it has, is that in many, many cases, your project actually has to start after you receive your grant results. Is that still, I'm seeing Katrina kind of give a, yeah, kind of.
Well, it's funny because what you're applying for would have to start after the May 15th. Say you're applying in this March session. Yeah. So the project can be started. If you're writing a book, you could be on your second draft. If you're creating a series of work, you might have some of the sketches done, you might have some of the work done. But so, you won't be able to put something in as support material anyway. So yes, the project can be started. It's just what you're looking for funding, whether that's framing, whether that's R&D, whether that's creation, would start after May 15th.
Exactly. And so I like to think of projects in phases. If you're at that stage, if you're in the preliminary stages where you've got your sketches, you've got your idea, but you're ready for that next step where it's like, no, I actually need to make this now, or I need to proceed to the next step, but I need funding for it. I like to break down my projects in phases and try to think of them in logical steps like that. Some people find that complicated. Some people find that doesn't help with them. But to me, it certainly helps. Another thing to take note of when you're kind of doing your schedule for the year, if you are a planner like myself, is the amount of time it does take to hear back from a lot of these results. So for Arts NL, it's like, I actually love the Arts NL one. It's 2 months. It's, exactly the date that you can check your portal or give a phone call and figure out if you have received a grant or not. City of St. John's, I believe, is 3 to 4 months, but that's over Christmas break as well, sort of thing. So it's a little bit longer. The Canada Council for the Arts is usually 3, 4, sometimes 5 months to hear back from them. I know with COVID, things have been, fluctuating quite a bit, and it's not uncommon to get an email saying that there have been delays. I know Canada Council has done that a few times. So yeah, just make sure that you kind of have that timeline in your head. I know for me, it can sometimes be difficult to put in an application and then you feel like you're sitting on pins and needles for a few months, just like waiting to hear if you can really jump into it. But yeah, be patient. There's always things you can do in the meantime while you hear back about that funding, and you can really jump into the meat of the project. And then this last page about eligibility is that I think it's really important, like I said, to just try and establish that relationship with the organization and with the funder. That is to say, contact Arts NL, contact Canada Council weeks before the deadline. Do not contact them a few days before the deadline. It's not worth it. You're really it shows that you're not on the ball sort of thing. But if you can contact them weeks ahead, say, hey, let's set up a phone call, let's set up a little meeting. I just want to run through this idea and my eligibility. They are not there to provide feedback on your grant or to give you a personal opinion on your grant or say how likely you are to be successful. It is truly impossible for them to know that and for them to give you that information. But they're able to meet with you, and they were able to talk about the eligibility criteria with you. Katrina, do you have more to add to that?
Yep, just looking at your screen. So the maximum grant for a new professional artist.
Oh, this is outdated, I should say.
Yeah, which we consider less than 3 years, not continuous, less than 3 years of professional experience is $6,000. The maximum request for an established professional who has more than 3 years professional experience is $15,000. And actually, we've increased it, so it's $850,000 that we award each session. So because of the amount of applications that are coming in, it's gone up. So you're going to likely see our release date go out a little bit, just because I'm still the one administering all of them. So it's a lot of work. But that's the only thing that stood out to me is like, oh, and I will read over an application. It's no guarantee that you're going to get a grant. It's just, I have been with Arts NL since 2001, and I've read a lot of these. I'm also a visual artist, and I have a degree in weaving, graphic design, and art education. So I'm very familiar with the fine art practice or visual art practice.
And I will say, all of the Arts NL grants I've submitted, I meet with Katrina first. I meet with Katrina just to go over things and make sure everything is like, checking the boxes and everything. I'm glad that the funding has gone up so much. I know it's taken a lot of work to get that to increase, a lot of work on Arts NL side, a lot of work on the advocacy side of the artists. So it's really exciting that you have more and more potential for projects. I mean, as an emerging artist, to be able to apply for up to, was it $5,000-$6,000? That's unheard of in a lot of cases. I know in Toronto, and on 6,000 in Ontario, you're not even eligible until after 3 years you've completed school to even apply as an emerging artist. So in Newfoundland, we really do have a good system working with us and working for us. So every single person who has an idea, I encourage them to apply, because you're not going to get money if you don't even try or you don't even apply for these things. This is going to sound like I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of you, but please, for the love of God, try to keep things organized when you're creating your grant, when you're getting all your documents together before you submit it, even when you're working internally, working it on your own computer. Stay organized and you will thank yourself for it. The last thing you want to do, especially if you're working from previous grants, previous CVs, previous bios, artist statements, you don't want to accidentally send in an outdated document. You don't want to send in something from 3 years ago. You don't want to make mistakes like that. That could cost you getting a grant. I always use Google Drive. You can always use just like the folders on your desktop. You can use Dropbox. You can use physical folders that you've printed out, but just, try to keep things organized. And that's also a great way for you to keep track of those evergreen documents that I talked about before. So your CV that I recommend updating, honestly, as soon as something new happens in your life that you think should go on that CV, just do it. Do it immediately, because you're probably going to forget about it, or you're going to get to that crunch time in a grant where you're like, oh, I didn't update my CV. So try to update that as soon as you can. Same with your support materials as well. I feel like a lot of the time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but a lot of the time people think for a grant, you have to submit the most recent 10 works you've done. That's not necessarily true. I mean, if your last 10 pieces are the best pieces you've done and they really speak to your project, sure, go for it. But I think what's most important is you submit work that best reflects your ability as an artist, your ability to actually undertake and be successful in the project that you're proposing, and work that is relevant and connected to the themes and the project that you're actually proposing you're going to do. So like if you're proposing a photography project and you just submit a bunch of ceramic pieces, there's going to be a question mark. So make sure you're submitting material that's actually relevant to your project. And I can talk a little bit about that soon. And then the last sort of couple of slides before we get into the actual writing part of it. This one, again, might feel a bit off. This is all my work. This is totally self-indulgent that I have this slide in there. But this is how I come up with projects. I feel like a big thing I struggle with, and I still struggle with it, and maybe other people do too, is getting started with an idea, overcoming creative block, self-doubt. You're like, oh my God, who am I to be asking for money to make artwork, blah, 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 trying to think of these things. So when I can't think of an idea or when I feel stuck about how to materialize an idea, I open up a document and I just start throwing in my recent work. I start throwing in pictures of work that I've done over the past couple of years, not only just for like motivation, but also you're trying to identify those through lines. Like, what are these themes I've been working with that maybe I wasn't even aware of? What is the palette I've been working with? How am I feeling? Like, what emotions come up with each of these pieces? And start writing them down, start putting them in a document, start scribbling them on paper. And I think once you start kind of connecting the dots in your own work, it's a really powerful moment because it's much easier to see the trajectory and where you should be going next once you see where you've been. I do this still in school right now. So like you always are trying to come up with new projects and things for critiques. And I still do this. I'll look back through my portfolio. I'll look back through documentation from the past year. And I'll say, what makes sense for me right now? What excites me still? What is going to get me in the studio and working on a project? So this is a little activity that might be helpful for you. Maybe it's not. It's really fun to do. If you've already got a list of kind of scattered ideas, meet up with a friend of yours. Maybe they're another artist. Maybe they're not. Show them your work and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Do you think that makes sense? Or how would you suggest I move forward with this? So we all have these kind of networks of support that I think are like very underutilized a lot of the time. If you have artist friends, they can be your editors, they can be your mentors, they can be such incredible support systems. So don't be afraid to share your work with them, even if it's just like an iPhone pic or even if it's a little sketch or something. Another thing about what I said, creating a project that has a trajectory or will show your growth as an artist, I think that's something that funders or selection committees, whether you're applying to an exhibition or a residency, they look for that. They look for the potential for growth in your career. They look for the potential in a project. And they definitely, I think maybe particularly within established or emerging artists, they want to see that there can be an evolution in your work. Because you want to show them how passionate you are. You want to show them that you have the drive to build on what you've already been doing and that you have the wherewithal to say, no, this is the next logical step for me. I need this for the growth of my career. And this is the clear steps that I'm going to use to get to that point. If you can be clear with them and they get it, then they will be supportive of the project for sure. But as I'm going to get down to editing and coming up with ideas and things like that, if you have a question mark or if you are not totally committed to your project, then it's going to be very, very difficult for a selection committee or for a jury to be on board. So you kind of have to be your number one fan, your number one cheerleader when you're submitting these things. And these are just some questions. If the more visual approach doesn't work for you, or maybe you want to do both, these are questions I like to ask myself as well. The first one, very basic. What kind of art are you making? Of course, that can mean like material-wise, like what materials are you working with? Are you working with more representational work, abstract work, conceptual work? Just like very broad kind of answers that you can give to that. But I always think you should inject what you are passionate about as well it should be reflected in your artwork and how you talk about your work. But if you're apathetic and you're not committed, or you're not excited about what you're presenting or what you're proposing, it definitely comes across in writing. On all the committees I've been on, you can tell when someone is just kind of slapping it together just to have a proposal done, and they're not actually invested in what they're trying to do. I'm not going to go through all these questions, but one of them I think is really key, and one I always try to keep at the front of my mind is, why is it important for you to be doing this project? You really have to connect yourself as an artist to the project that you are proposing. They could get 50 different proposals for painting projects that have something to do with, I don't know, Newfoundland. So your job in your application is to convince them why you are the right person to be undertaking the project. What makes you have the right experience? What makes you have the means, the ability to do it? And why is it that they should be funding you potentially over somebody else? Might sound a little, cutthroat, which, and I guess you can look at it like it is, but you're really trying to sell yourself as the best person to be undertaking a project. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I think that making it personal and kind of finding that personal connection to a project is really helpful when you're, proposing a project grant for yourself. When it comes to an exhibition or a residency, I think a key step that people don't tend to think about is the connection to place and the history of the organization or the history of the residency and the context that you're going to be. Honestly, you're going to be an outsider. You're going to be an intruder in this context. And so how do you reflect in that proposal by saying, this is how I'm going to be aware of that. This is how I'm going to try to integrate myself into the community. This is how X, Y, and Z. So yeah, making it personal, connecting you to a project or you to a proposal, I think is key, and I think is really important. You can answer all of these kind of like a checklist if you want. Again, that scrap piece of paper, that scrap document you have, just start throwing sentences to the wall, throwing out words, throwing out paragraphs. Nothing has to look pretty at this point. You're not submitting this draft document you have of like word scramble, word webs, whatever you end up doing. The main purpose right now is you're just trying to get pen to paper. You're trying to get your words out there so that you can see them and so that you can work with them and manipulate them and then create a more cohesive project proposal. How are we feeling so far? Good? Questions? Anything? Okay, people can feel free to jump on in. But the next section will be about actually developing a project proposal and refining it. Sometimes people aren't even sure what a project proposal is. Like, is it an abstract? Is it like a 4-page like research essay? It's kind of an in-between, honestly, of a lot of those things. It's 1 to 2 pages. I tend to think keeping it short works better. I don't know, some people like to really push that word count. But I think as long as you can have a piece of writing that is clear and concise and really explains what you want to be doing and how you're going to approach it and why it's important to your career as an artist, I think that's key. And those are the main points you're going to be trying to hit with a project proposal. I think a lot of the time, if you're on a selection committee or a jury looking at, exhibition proposals, you could have hundreds that you're looking at. If every single person pushed that word limit to 2 pages, 3 pages, whatever it might be, you're going to get burnt out very quickly. That's not to say people are going to skip reading it. They are going to read it. It's part of their obligation to be on the committee and the jury. But you want to make life easier for everybody because you want to be clear and you want to be concise. Something I fall into a lot is by using jargon, by using like really poetic kind of language, overly descriptive language. And I feel like sometimes that can really dilute a project idea. And I've learned that firsthand, of course. So for me, it's about walking that fine line between being clear and concise, but also staying true to my tone or my aesthetic or my voice as an artist as well, because you want the viewer or the reader to be able to hear your voice through your proposal. Sometimes it's a little difficult, especially if you're talking about like really technical things, like how do you share your voice as an artist when you're talking about the process of mixing clay or mixing paint or something. But there's lots of creative ways you can do it. This next slide, these are I'm gonna pull from this, I think, at some point, but I think it's kind of funny to keep these in there. These are both from successful grants. One is from my first grant ever, 2016, and one is from a 2019 grant. And I like to kind of read my old grants sometimes. They're a little bit cringy, I've got to say. Even over the few, like, limited number of years I've been writing grants, you're like, oh God, how did that get funded? Sometimes very thankful that it did. But there's always an opportunity to learn and to grow from the writing that you've already done. So I'm not going to read through all these. That's a little bit, it's too much. But if you're ever stuck and you're not sure how to start, just think back to high school, think of that good old introduction, body, conclusion sort of format. I think the introductory paragraph is the most important part. It's the hook. It's how you get people interested. If you can get them interested and excited about your project from the first couple of sentences, then it'll bode well for you, because then they'll be engaged with all the details that you're talking about. They'll be engaged with the ideas that you're presenting. But if they read the first paragraph and they have no idea what you're even asking for or what you're proposing at first, then it's hard for them to have a clear image in their mind as they're reading the rest of the proposal.
Daniel,
Yeah.
yeah, from what I'm reading, like, actually, your 2016 one is not cringy at all. It reads like an objective sentence.
Yeah.
And without that objective sentence, say you take that away, and all of a sudden you start talking about your life in rural Newfoundland, and this, in 3 paragraphs later, they're going, what is he
What are you proposing?
doing? And then
Exactly.
he goes, but right off the bat, this collection will consist of 5 to 7 large scale paintings, and you talk about the subject matter. The rest of your project description gives all the details. And
Exactly.
that's the importance of that.
Definitely. And yeah, Sheila, do you have something to add? You're muted.
There we go. Okay, so thanks. So, you know what, I just wanted to ask a question. The biggest question, look, I've been around for a long time, and I'm trying to get reclimatized to the granting process, because I used to do it in the analog days primarily. But, you know, the most daunting thing for me as, you know, an existing artist that is not emerging is the process, right? What you put in when you, obviously you have intent and you have like your idea formed, and you know the idea of making it a clear idea and everything, but you don't really know what you're going to produce in the end, right? Because that would be contrary to the whole creative process, wouldn't it? So my challenge always mentally is, what do you put in there? What is the framework that you put in there, knowing that there's going to be a big surprise at the end, right? Even though you know the materials you're working with and things like that. So I don't know if somebody could speak to that, because you don't want to be ambiguous, because you want to sound like you know exactly what you're doing and the concept is there, but you can't really say exactly how many pieces you're going to have or what it's going to look like, because otherwise I'm going to be putting myself in a box, right? So anyway, I saw that out.
I can speak to it first, but then Katrina, I definitely want your thoughts on that afterwards, because for me, that, like I said, that's a line I've been kind of teetering between. And why I have these 2 examples is because for me, although I did get that 2016 grant, it stressed the hell out of me. A lot of, like, as I was getting closer to the end, I was like, oh God, I've got 4 paintings. I need to get 7. You know, you do feel, especially as an emerging artist, you feel like you have to get into that. But no, that's not the case. You don't have to be locking yourself into these numbers or that sort of thing. Like you said, do not be ambiguous. I think 2019, I sort of walked that line where I talked about, you know, developing a series of acrylic paintings, ceramic sculptures. So you talk about the medium you're using, and then of course you're going to build on that and talk about the themes behind it. But you're just referring to it as a series or a collection, or I don't know. I feel like grants are even getting a little bit better when it comes to this discussion, because they're funding more of the research process as well, and the creative process, and they're understanding that it's different for everybody. And you, first of all, just need that boost to be able to explore ideas and to explore themes in your work and to explore the medium that you're working with. Like specifically, I know Katrina can talk about Arts NL when it comes to that sort of situation, but with Canada Council, there's the very clear grants that you can apply to. There's the Research and Creation Grant, which is specifically for diving into a topic for, you know, making a bit of work, but there's no sort of expectation or outcome for that project. There's not like you have to have a show. There's not like you have to have X, Y, and Z. And then there's another whole separate body within the Canada Council that's for your concept to realization. And that's where you have your project, it's coming together. Now you just need to finish it up. You need to frame it. You need to get it into an exhibition. You need to present it somehow. So they really break it into two components. I know people who have gotten Arts NL grants where it has been more research forward. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically about like 5 to 7 paintings. I think it really helps with clarity, of course, if you know what you're doing and you know you can communicate that with the jury. But yeah, that's a line I've been kind of walking and teetering back and forth on for a while. But Katrina, do you have something to add?
I'll mute. Okay, so yes, you are not tied into that. And if Daniel had called, said, I got 4 done and really think I've used up the money, I would have said, stop. It's fine. And he could have just said it consists of large scale. So I'm reading the 2019 one, and it's creating a series of acrylic media paintings and ceramic sculptures. So where the clarity for that would happen is, you know, if someone looks at the budget and he's asking for very little clay, then they're having an idea going, how big are these things going to be? You know, that's that, you know, so including if it was large scale or small, or how they're going to work alongside one another would help them to see how the paintings and the sculptures, are they individual or are they working together? But I always say the project description is the best case scenario. If you don't get your full grant, if you do get your full grant, you're not tied to it. As long as you say, I mean, if you just send me an email saying it's going to change a little bit, that's fine. This is for us now. This is for us now. So, and the only difference is if you are saying, I'm not going to do that at all. I'm not going to do photography project at all. I'm going to do a weaving project. No, I'm not a weaver. Oh, then we'd have an issue. Or you're going to do a residency. But if you're doing a basically similar project, the large scale isn't working, you're going to go to medium size because the cost of getting that developed is astronomical. You know, there's things that change. Even the prices you quote in your price quotes that you get in the application are going to change. We know there's going to be change. So, but what you're putting there is as clear a picture you can for the peer assessors.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much, because that's the thing that wigs me out always is just trying to figure out how definite you have to be in your approach. So that answers it. Thank you.
Yeah. And if the past couple of years have taught us anything, it's that, you know, expect the unexpected when it comes to not only your career, but to life circumstances. And you never know how, you know, things are going to change. I know there was a lot of projects that ended up changing over COVID for a lot of people. So yeah, staying flexible is always really important. The next slide, I'm actually going to skip most of the slide because this is just getting into nitty gritty. I mean, I'm going to give you a copy of all this if you want to jump into it, see what I've highlighted and see what I'm talking about. But the main point I want to give you to take away from this is when you're editing, or before you even start editing and you're just writing, don't be afraid to go over that word count. Don't be afraid to just put everything on paper and seeing what sticks at the end. Like in this one, there are whole sentences I just cut. There could be paragraphs you cut. You're going to be rearranging things. Things are going to look a little hectic and a little disorganized when you're in that writing process. At least it does for me. So yeah, don't be afraid to go into that. One thing I do like to always try to check myself with is when I'm writing proposals and when I'm reading out sentences that I've written, I try to take a step back and think, okay, if I was on the jury or if I was on the selection committee and I just read that sentence, would I have a question? What is a question that's going to come to their mind, and how can I predict that, and how can I answer it in the next sentence? So for example, if I said, I'm going to be making, I'm not even going to read the exact phrasing, but I talked about photo transfers. And that's the first time I brought up photo transfers in my paintings. So the question obviously that's going to pop up in the jury is, wait, what are they talking about? Like, what do they mean photo transfers? Where did these photos come from? What are they photos of? And so in this draft, I had written, they're taken by myself or someone else, and they're emblematic of my childhood memories. And of course, later on, I talk more specifically about what those memories and photos are. However, looking at this now, I would just start being specific. Be really clear, answer the questions that are coming up as you're writing. It'll help it be more clear for yourself, of course, as you're developing your ideas. But also you're trying to make sure there's as few question marks as possible in that jury room when they're reading your proposal. You want to make sure you're trying to check every box, but also you're going to want to make sure that every idea that you introduce to them, it's not about spoon feeding, it's not about holding their hand, but it's about making sure that you're not being too vague or ambiguous or leaving out crucial information. I think a lot of the time as well, we are very, very close to our art practice and we're very close to our artwork. And we sometimes forget that not everybody lives in our brain. So you have to tell the jury absolutely everything that they need to know, because you have to assume they don't know who you are and they know nothing about your practice. They have to base their decisions on the package that is delivered to them and the writing that is given to them. So I think sometimes what I like to do is write down, back in those a couple of slides ago when I was looking at my artwork, write down the big themes that are always in my work. So in my work in particular, I'm always making something in relation to rural Newfoundland, to my upbringing, to my childhood. And I think sometimes it's easy for me to jump into a new project and not talk about that, or not let people know that sort of foundation information. And so that way, if I'm writing a proposal, I always make a mental note and say, no, start with what you know and start with where you come from and start with what your work is all connected to, because that way you are laying that foundation for the jury to better understand who you are as a person, but also who you are as an artist. It's very easy to sometimes forget what is obvious to you in your work. Maybe you're like, oh, I always do black and white because of X, Y, and Z. The jury doesn't know that. And you might forget to mention that because it's just second nature to you. So, sometimes dial it back to the basics and make sure you're not missing crucial information. I could talk a little bit about budgets, but budgets are so specific to different funders and what they're asking for and what they're looking for. One thing I do always love to do is you obviously have the budget that you're submitting to the funder. I always make a plan B. I make a plan B that has about 80% funding. I don't know if that's still the magic number for Arts NL or for District Canada Council, but it's usually if you are successful, you will not be funded less than 80% of what you asked for, which is really great that you don't get an acceptance letter or a letter saying you've been funded, we're giving you half of what you asked for. That's kind of a bad situation to find yourself in. But when it comes to budgets, I always like to say, okay, what if in the scenario I don't get my full funding? Can I still make this project work? Is it still feasible? What are the little changes and cuts I have to make to still say, you know what, I can do this project. I'm not going to stress myself out. I'm not going to worry about cutting really important things. It's just about being responsible with your budget, not being too over excessive or being unreasonable, because these are things that the jury's going to pick up on. Like Katrina said, the example of looking at the budget, don't put in that you're going to spend $3,500 on paint for a photography project or for a ceramic project. Like, things have to be obvious and they have to make sense. Because like I said, the jury, they have the whole package. They have your budget, they have your portfolio, they have your proposal, and they're going to be making sure that all the dots are connected and that everything can kind of rely on one another to be a really successful and cohesive proposal. Does that make sense? Are we still good so far?
Yeah, I usually tell people, don't have anything in your budget that's not in your project description, and vice versa. So say, and I'm going to put Sheila right on the spot. So say Sheila is doing an exhibit, a work, and she's going to travel all over the Northern Peninsula. But when you come to the budget, there's no travel costs in there.
Mm-hmm.
Going, I guess she's going on her own car. I suppose, I don't know, but it's not reflected back there. So, or the other thing is all of a sudden it is in there, but you forgot to mention that that's what you're going to do. That's always a sort of a big thing. And if you get price quotes, it's great. I always say if you go like to Curry's or to wherever you go, throw stuff into a virtual shopping basket and take a photo of it, and then you can upload that you've done your research. This is the approximate cost. We know it's not going to cost that much, but you've done your research. It's not $1,500.
Yeah. I was even going to show this slide because it's such an old budget. And like I would do things so differently in this. But yeah, I always, and I don't think Arts NL or Canada Council has this, but I was always kind of cheeky and loved to put in little like extra sentences at the bottom of my budget that kind of supplemented what I was asking for and why and things like that. But yeah, I always do that. I go online, I do a shopping cart, I base my budget off of that because you want to show that you're being responsible. I also include that as some support material. I know it's not asked for and it is kind of extra, but if you can submit like evidence that this is real costs and things like that, then I think it's always good. Yeah, always try to have a buffer. And I mean, when it comes to talking about money, a lot of artists hate it. They don't like asking for funding for themselves. They don't like, you know, saying that they need money for materials or that they should be paying for themselves, X, Y, and Z. But yeah, I think that's just like a collective issue we all got to get over real quick and know that our artwork is worth asking for support for and it's worth being paid for. Yeah, Katrina?
Yeah, no. Always put in living expenses. We allow up to $3,000 a month. Do not break it down. You don't want the peer assessors reading into your life. That is not what they're for.
Mhm.
If you got to pay childcare, if you're paying a more for mortgage or whatever, no, you don't want them investigating that. And if you think about it, writers, all they ever ask for is living expenses.
Yes.
So why, for some reason, writers should be paid for their time, but visual artists are not? So
Yeah.
it never made sense to me, especially as a visual artist.
That is so important. And I will say, even so, I was on the jury for a Canada Council selection committee back in 2020. And there were, yeah, writing proposals submitted $25,000, one line in their budget, expenses, artist fee, living expenses. It gets approved. So do not be afraid to pay yourself, to put in those living expenses. We are people, we need to eat, we need to pay rent, we need to pay ourselves to create. So yeah, we need to get over that guilt a little bit. And I think one way of doing that is by encouraging everybody to apply to grants. I think once you get that grant and once you get that funding, you start to, you know, as sometimes sad as it might be that you need the outside validation, I think we all sort of do. And you get that validation and you get that support and you think, oh, you know what? No, I can do this. I can ask for this. I can, you know, undertake this project. So yeah, budgets are a whole other conversation. We could probably talk for hours just on that and little tricks and everything, but I'm gonna skip to, or not skip, I'm gonna go to the next slide on revising and tidying up. So how are we feeling? Any questions so far? You feeling a little bit overwhelmed or anything? Okay, we're good. I know it's a lot going on. And I know we are kind of approaching an hour. I don't have a time limit. I can stick around as long as you want for questions and such at the end. This is the most important part. I think anyone will say this, anyone will agree, editing, revising, tidying up. It's a part that, you know, I'm guilty saying when I was in high school, when I was in undergrad, you write that essay, last minute, you submit it, you're done. Chances are you'll be docked for all the mistakes that you forgot, all the mistakes you didn't pick up on. It's the same for a grant. I think it's difficult to do, but try to get that draft written weeks before the deadline. If like as much time as possible between that you and the deadline, because that's the point where not only are you going to want to step away from it, don't look at it for a couple of days, come back to it with fresh eyes, get the writing done. But this is where you tap into that support system. You reach out to your friends, you reach out to people who have maybe gotten the grant before, gotten the opportunity. You email them and say, hey, would you either want to get coffee with me and I can, you know, troubleshoot some ideas, read this to you, we'll go through it. If you're going to email them a copy of your grant to edit for you, give them 2 weeks. Do not email them and say, hey, the deadline's in 2 days. Can you quickly go through this for a couple of hours and edit it and send it back to me? If you've got a great friend, they might do it. If you've got a great artist friend, they will tell you right where to go. They know their time is worth it. They know they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, I think that you need to try to be as on the ball as possible, get things done early, send it to your friends, get that feedback from them, contact the organization, say, hey, am I missing anything? What's happening here? A practice I've done it once and I'm never going to do it again, but I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I work through this project proposal? And I was trying to keep that question in mind that was, or that thought in mind that was, the jury doesn't know who I am. They don't know what I'm proposing, assume they know nothing about my work. And so I said, okay, who doesn't know much about my artwork, but they know I'm an artist and they might be able to figure this out. And so I thought of my mom. And so I called my mom and I said, hey, I'm going to read through my project proposal. I want you to stop me when you're confused or when you're lost. I made it about halfway through the introductory paragraph. She's like, I got a question. So I said, okay, I'm not doing this again. However, it was extremely helpful because it gives you that perspective of someone who, like I said, doesn't live in your brain, isn't the one who wrote that proposal, and they'll very easily be able to pick up on inconsistencies or things that don't make sense. So it was a trial by fire, I think, but it really did help me when it came to clarifying my project and to working on that proposal. And I reworked that proposal a lot, and I did end up getting funded for it afterwards, but I don't know that I would have if I had submitted it as is. These are some of the bigger questions you always want to think about. You want to think about word count. You want to think about, is it a word count or is it a character count? Because Canada Council, I believe, is a character count, which is a little bit frustrating. There are times when the formatting is also different. So you could be in your Word document and you highlight it and it says it's 500 characters, but then you put it into that little box in Canada Council and suddenly you're missing 1.5 sentences at the end. So there's a lot of times that can happen. So just be aware of these little like formatting, logistical things. Don't log into the Arts NL portal 20 minutes before the due time and like start adding it. Like that's things you have to do the weeks leading up. You want to make sure everything looks good in the portal. You want to make sure everything fits, make sure you're not missing anything. Katrina, please.
Opposite problem for us. We do not use the word count. We have the same word count as you as the NSO. So it says 5,000 words.
Oh my God.
That is not a goal. Do not use that. I tell people between 1 and 3 pages is enough. If you're gone to 5, you're repeating yourself, which is what I'm guilty of. Half a page is too short. And the same thing we allow, I think it's 200 words for your brief description, sentence or 2, that's all. So, but it's the same because we get it done through Smart Simple. It's the same for organizations as it is for individuals. So please do not adhere to the word count.
Yeah, 5,000 words, that's about 10 pages. Do not do that. Please do not do that for everyone's sake, not only Katrina's sake. Just never submit something that's more than, like, even if it said 3,000 words, it's sort of like you're going to be repeating yourself. It's not going to make sense. You're going to be looking for words to fill in. You're just going to be looking to fill space. I always aim for about 1.5 pages to 2 pages. Even like I said, 2 pages to me, I start to check out. Like if I'm reading my own project proposal and I start to like glaze over and reread things, you know it's bad. So you know you have to kind of hone it in a little bit. But yeah, and that's good even when you're in, so like I'm in grad school right now and we're writing a new artist statement every semester, and we're updating a new project statement for every project we do each semester as well. And they always say 500 words, keep it to a page. And I'm trying to like get it down to 2 paragraphs, a cute 2 paragraphs that people can read and they get it. That's what I'm aiming for at this point. So yeah, how much do you need to cut down? Definitely keep track of that. Check your tone. That's, you know, formatting wise, you don't want to switch between different perspectives, which is a bit strange. You don't want to be first person, third person, all that good stuff. But also, I find, like I said, my tone when I'm writing tends to be a little bit more poetic, maybe romantic, very descriptive, talking about different things. So you don't want to have those harsh cuts between very descriptive and like painting a picture and then you're listening something. I mean, you can, but you just want to make sure everything is consistent and it feels good to be reading throughout the entire project proposal. Again, is your perspective consistent? And then another big thing you should really try to remember, and this is also just like in life, try to do this, and I'm trying to do it more, is using confident and affirmative language. So rather than writing things like, I think I want to do this, or maybe I will do this, just cut out those words and say, I will make, with this funding, I will create, I will reflect. You know, it sounds a bit strange. Maybe it's like, oh, that's cocky. No, it's confident and it's affirmative and it's what people want to be hearing, because they want to hear that you have the confidence in your writing. If they're reading paragraph upon paragraph of like, maybe I'll do this, but if this doesn't work, maybe I'll try this. They're like, they don't know what they're talking about. They're kind of all over the place. And this isn't a project that needs to be, or that we need to be funding right now. They need to kind of, you know, get all their ducks in a row. And I think that reflects in your language. And you don't realize how often you say, maybe, might, want to do this, until you're editing and you're reading through and you're like, oh, I really do need to change these. And when you do change it into the I will, I want, like more affirmative language, and then you read your proposal, it sounds like a different person. It sounds like everything is much more clear. You as the reader are more confident in what you're reading and more confident in that image you're putting in your mind. So yeah, that's something I like to think about. And I like to think about that when I'm doing interviews for a job or for media, or anytime you're presenting yourself or your artwork, try to be confident. There is that fine line, of course, coming across as arrogant, things like that, but you want to be confident in your work, and you want to, I think you should be proud to be sharing your work with people. And so that'll come across in the language that you're using. Does that make sense to people? Is there any questions about that sort of language? Okay. Always send your writing to someone for edits. I did this even my very, very first Arts NL grant. The first thing I did was like, okay, Arts NL, look at the guidelines. Am I eligible? And then I went to people who I knew in the community. I think my first ever grant, I sent it to like Kai Bryan and like April and like a bunch of people who I knew had already gotten grants, and said, hey, you don't really know me, but I would love to apply for these grants. I'd love to get some help and some edits. And so many people were so helpful. People have different editing styles, I will say. Some people will read it, they'll send you a couple little notes on the side. That is excellent. That is not the writing style or the editing style I have that I've developed over the years from different people. I will ask permission to really tear it up a little bit. I love Google Docs because I will highlight things. Even if I highlight things, some of my comments will be, this doesn't make sense, or like why, or where, or how. Just asking those type of clarifying questions that the jury might have. I always try to check people on that language that they're using, if it's affirmative or if it's a bit wishy-washy. So yeah, always send it to someone, a trusted friend or a colleague that can help you out. Give them plenty of time. Please give them plenty of time. Every grant season that comes around, like beginning of March, I can predict I'm going to have a few people in my friends list messaging me saying, hey, can you look at this real quick? And it piles up quite quickly. So reach out to people well in advance. And I think that even if you can't do that, if you can't think of anyone who can reach out, you can reach out to. The other option is obviously editing it yourself, but please step away from it. You still need to have those couple of weeks in advance to have it done, because if you say, okay, I finished it this morning, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, and then I'm going to do all my editing, that is still not going to show you all the errors that might be in your writing. You need to step away for a few days at least. And when I say step away, I mean step away. Do something else. Don't think about your artwork. Don't think about your practice. You know, do something completely on another side of your brain. And that way, when you come back to your writing, it's going to be like unfamiliar to you. You're going to be reading it. You're going to be picking up on details that are unclear. You're going to see the grammatical errors. You're going to understand the tone of it, because you're not going to be super close to it anymore. You're going to have that distance, and you're going to be able to understand when the tone isn't consistent, or when the tone is off, or when oh, why do I talk about this paragraph here near the end? That should really be at the beginning. That's important for me. You'll really start to prioritize your ideas in a different way. This one's really difficult. Like I said, I find it very hard to complete things weeks and weeks in advance. I like don't have the motivation for that a lot of the time. But I've been trying to be better, especially when you're sending your writing to someone for edits. And the other thing is, even if you have gotten several grants, you've been doing this for years, like I am trying to like teach people how to do grant writing, I still need someone to edit my work because there will be mistakes in it. There's no point at which in your career you have perfect writing and you're never going to have a mistake and you're never going to need an editor or someone to give you a second set of eyes. So yeah, I still do this. I will not submit anything unless someone has looked at it. That's a lie. If it's a submission that's last minute, I will totally submit it. But you shouldn't do that. You definitely should always get someone to look at it. And when it comes to larger grants, like I applied for SSHRC funding back in the fall of my first year, and that is Tri-Council funding. It's like a big chunk of money that funds graduate studies. And it's a one and done in most cases. If you don't get it, you don't get it. You have to wait like 6 months before you hear the results. It's a really big deal. So I got like 2 of my friends to edit it. I sent it to all my profs I had at the time. It was due the 1st of December, and I started the 1st of September on my draft. Started getting my ideas figured out. And that's not to say you have to like dedicate 4 months of your life to every grant proposal you do. That's a bit chaotic as well. But like I said, if you can get the ball rolling and you get a couple of grants done, you've got, and I've said it a couple times already, those evergreen documents that you just need to jump in, do a couple little updates on your CV, things like that. And it'll make your life easier moving forward. And hopefully it'll mean you don't need to spend a full month on every proposal. You can just sit down for a few hours, update things, plan out your ideas, and then start bringing in your support network to really iron things out. I can talk a little bit about support materials as well. Preparing an image list. I mean, sometimes people ask for very specific breakdowns of like what to list in an image list. Sometimes they don't. I mean, the go-to is at least your name, your contact, the date, what you're applying for, the title of the work, the medium, so what the work is, the dimensions, and then what's really important is the year. So if you can do that, it kind of creates this like visual CV, this visual timeline of your career so far and what you've been developing and what you've been working on. And like I said, it doesn't have to be the most recent images you've done. They just have to be images that relate to your project, that relate to your budget and what you're proposing. Like Katrina said, all of these separate pieces have to line up, and they're going to be making sure that they're all reflected in one another. So you really want this image list, since it's the only visual thing they're going to be looking at as a visual artist, you want it to make sense with your proposal. I think it's always a good sign of a successful grant or an application or submission to me is, since I always look at the images first, I don't know, different people, different methods, I always look at the images first, and then I will start reading through. And if it makes sense to me and I can see where they're going and it builds on what they've already done, then I know that they've put a lot of thought into it and it seems successful. But if I'm reading a proposal and thinking like, oh, this doesn't make sense. They haven't shown they're able to do this, or they haven't shown they're able to work to this scale or to this level of what they're proposing, then that kind of sets off some red flags. And I can only imagine it's the other way around as well. If you're reading and you have an image of something in your brain, and then you look at the images and like there's no connection, then yeah, red flag city. Katrina, do you have something to add?
Oh, just where we use Smart Simple, something I found just through using this since 2018 is making a one, and we're very different than Canada Council. We don't give the dimensions of everything what you should do. So if you're a visual artist, instead of having 20 images and an image list, put it all into one Word document or whatever, and then title each page and save it as a PDF. So each page of your document is a different part of it. So that way the peer assessors don't have to open up 21 files on their computer. They open up one. And it might be different, like that image we saw earlier of Daniel's, where he had a bunch of things and he breaks it down afterwards as far as maybe their sketches, maybe their ideas, or maybe their finished works. And then you have your title and your medium and your size and things like that. But having it in one PDF, I have found makes a huge difference. First time it ever came in was a graphic designer did it. And I went, that's brilliant. So, and it really makes a difference for the peer assessors. If they're looking through 50 applications in our case, getting one document instead of 20 per each applicant makes a huge difference for their time.
Definitely. And I think, honestly, maybe that's a shift a lot of people should be doing. I'm just thinking back to, you know, when we do our Eastern Edge applications and things like that, we ask for very specific things, you know, images under a certain size in the email, but there is also that labor that goes in where we have to go through every email. We put it into a Google Drive folder. And then during the actual selection committee meeting, we have one person kind of controlling, like, this is their writing. Okay, now let's switch back to the images. So yeah, I like that idea. And I like that is something that funders are looking for. But yes, please look at the eligibility and what they're asking, or the requirements, I should say, for each grant. Canada Council is different because they also have, it's a portal that they use. And when you're on the jury, you're looking at it. And it's kind of like if you are reviewing something that you've submitted. So it doesn't put it all in one neat PDF. You still have to click through the different sections in order to review it. And it's all broken down in different ways. But yeah, I think the main thing to take away from this is when you're curating your images or you're curating your support material, just make sure everything is bound together. Everything is making connections thematically, technically, make sure everything makes sense with one another.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
I think in addition to a really good image list, like also making sure that the images, the like title of the file makes sense. So you know which image corresponds to which thing on the list. Because sometimes you'll get like a really nice clear image list, but then the photos are just called like DC 569821 and you don't know which one goes where. So it's about like having clarity on both ends and so they connect together.
Definitely. I think the images themselves should have the artist's last name, the title of the work, and then ideally the year as well. So that way you can really tell what's happening in each one. And if there's a detail, put detail. There's no details in this one right here, but if you have a detail shot, include that as well.
Actually, it probably should match your image list.
Yes.
If you have 01, 02, 03,
yes,
that's
exactly
what it should, your list should be in that you upload. It matches your image list so they don't have to hunt for them.
Yeah, exactly. So I have specific examples when it comes to artist-run centers and grad schools and things like that, but I think maybe this is just a good point to stop and ask for questions, or do we kind of want to dig into specific application? You can always ask questions about that after if you'd like.
I want to add one thing that you might know, and it's too bad Sheila's gone, but I think Ashley should know specifically as well. There's one thing that sort of changed real quiet at Arts NL. Used to have to be a Canadian citizen or a landed or permanent resident. That is no longer the case.
That's incredible news.
Yeah, so you can
That's
be,
amazing.
as long as you've lived in Newfoundland and Labrador for 12 months, it's fine. So you don't have to be, you don't have to go through that. We know what it takes to become a permanent resident. It's just too much work and you're not even doing your artwork during that time. So I just want, if you're talking to people, let them know that they're not disqualified from applying just because they don't meet that. As long as you're living in Newfoundland, it's all good.
Amazing. And Katrina, I've got listen, full transparency. Usually when I get to this page in Arts NL, I have a mini rant about how all funders need to be changing this type of requirement eligibility. So that's really excellent to hear that
first one is gone.
Yeah, that's so exciting to know. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, I'm going to stick around for as long as we need to. If anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, I guess, unless there's a specific thing people wanted to go back to. But yeah, I'll just pause for a second and see. You can raise your hand, you can turn on your microphone, whatever you need to do.
I have maybe like a comment, less of a question.
Yeah.
But like specifically with a lot of the grants, they have online portals like you mentioned, and a lot of the time you have to sign up for an account on the portal and they need to approve it. So it's definitely something that people should do like very far in advance, not at the last minute. Even if you don't know if you're going to apply, or you might apply next time, you might apply this time, like you should sign up for the portal right away, because then you have the option to apply.
Definitely. And if
I should mention something as well, because a lot of people don't know about this, and we don't want it to turn into grant writers using this option to access money. But if you're sharing your screen there, Daniel, if you want to go to artsnl.ca.
Sure. I just need to share my screen slightly in a different way, but I will do
Yeah.
that.
Because I know I can't do it because I'm not a presenter.
It's all
But I
good.
want people to know about this because it doesn't get much pickup. And for people who, so yeah, just go to ArtsNL.
Mhm.
Okay, under accessibility, that very top thing there. Okay, so this is something, it's not a grant, but it is a support program we have. You can apply for it once in a fiscal year for us from April 1st to March the 31st. So if you they're right here, if you have any kind of learning disability or physical disability or living with any kind of health issues, Indigenous artists that are facing language issues, anyone, and this is the big one that I wanted, even if English or French is not your first language, that's fine. And you need someone to help you write the application. You can apply, and by just calling or emailing me or Ashley Lewis, sorry, not Ashley, who's the other, and we will approve up to $500 for the person who did it, whether it's your significant other, your mom, or a grant writer. They will be able to write this application. And once you're approved, still have to be approved from the portal as a professional artist. But once you are and you want to apply for a program, you could get somebody else to write the application for you if you want. And they would send us an invoice and we pay them directly. And I saw a question come up.
Yeah, I can answer that in regards to Canada Council, and I think I know the answer for ArtsNL, but Katrina, if you want to answer that question.
I can't see it.
From Nassim. So the question was, can students apply for ArtsNL grant for moving costs or renting student housing? Also, does it work for materials for the school's artwork? I believe no is the answer.
No. No, students can apply, and we have. So, but it would not be for ArtsNL. It would not be for any of the living costs while you are still a student. Sometimes people apply for things that are happening in the summer, which is fine. We have music students that are applying for residencies, people who are building their portfolio. So it's for work that will not be submitted as part of your degree or diploma and be graded. It's not for any of that. It's not for creating work that you're going to apply to be in a master's program, but it is for materials, sure, but for work that you would be creating otherwise. So students have applied, they've applied many times, but it's just not a part of your degree. It would never be submitted as part of your program.
Yeah, and that's the same for the Canada Council for the Arts. Most of the time you'll get people in grad school or PhD programs applying for that, but they do have a clause saying they cannot fund things that are part of your academic requirements. So they won't be able to fund a project that's just like your thesis work or something. You can apply for funding, say if you're doing like a residency or you're doing an exhibition that you need to travel for. Like for me, I have my grad school projects that I'm working on, but I also have an exhibition and a residency happening at Union House in a few months. So I'm applying for travel funds through Canada Council to go to that residency. So Yeah, there's a few different workarounds, but usually when it comes to grant writing, you can only apply for things that are not specifically tied to academia or to your school. It has to be for things that are extra, for projects you're developing completely separately. And actually for Canada Council, it's like very difficult to draw a line between what you're working on in school and then if you're doing a separate project. They require a note from your academic advisor or from your supervisor saying, this is separate from their thesis work, this is separate from their academic work, therefore it is, it is not tied to the university or the institution or blah, blah, blah. But even that's like difficult to receive funding in those situations. That being said, a lot of these notes hopefully can be used for you applying for grants, bursaries, scholarships that are specific to schools. I know a lot of schools have specific project development funds that you can apply to as an artist. Like they'll have maybe a $500 or $1,000 that you can apply to fund your practice, which is really nice. I also know like SHRC, like I said, tri-council funding, national funding. Those are like heavy duty project proposal grant applications. It's almost like speaking a different language, I've got to say. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll bring mine up briefly just to show you, but it's like scary to be quite honest, how different it is. Let me see.
Did you get SHRC?
I did get SHRC.
Oh, good
which is
job.
great, thank you. But this is how SHRC looks compared to an artist grant. It's they want to know your research question, they want to know your description, they want to know context, objective, method. It has to be cited. You've got to have specific research tied to things, and then you've got to submit your bibliography. So it's very, very different than a normal grant application, but this is what they look for when it comes to funding graduate or PhD students with their project. So yeah, and I mean, there's definitely pieces that I've pulled from grants, and there's grants and applications I've written since that, talk about, working in textiles in rural communities, but I would never, in an Arts NL grant, write that my research question is using textiles to disrupt the hierarchical structures of artistic value upheld by social, it's just like, it's ridiculous. It's so much jargon, but the thing with SHRC is you are applying as an artist in a pot of money that has a lot of non-artists in it. A lot of the people who are applying are in social sciences, they're in like actual sciences as well. So they look at this as a research proposal. What is your question? What are the qualitative and quantitative results that you will get from this? So the scarier thing, I think, apart from all this writing, is when you apply for SHRC, there's no portfolio. They have no idea what my artwork looks like. They have not seen any images of my work. You just have to try to convince them, like, these are the research questions I'm asking within my work. And my way of creating research and knowledge is through research creation. It's through my art practice. So that's a bit of a tangential conversation for sure. But yeah, that's kind of what SHRC looks like. Yeah, so some people had to drop off. That's okay. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen once again. That was a whole side conversation, but yeah, is there any other questions? How are people feeling? I know it's a lot of info, but you are going to get the slides, you're going to get the notes, you're going to get the recording, I guess, all of that good stuff. Perfect. I've answered every question.
Just for folks' information as well, Daniel is going to be doing another workshop with us in March on writing artist statements. So related to this, slightly different. And you'll probably talk a little bit about like the difference between artist statements and project proposals.
Yeah, artist statements, project statements, things like that, how they're different, how they're the same. And ideally, we'll have a little bit of time in that one to really like troubleshoot and dig into people's proposals as well and statements so that we can, help each other out a bit.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop Recording.
Okay.